Hello out there. Welcome to Wake Up to the Bible. I'm Daniel Kaplan. I'm here with my father, Dr. Kaplan. Together, we're going through the books of the law, Genesis to Deuteronomy, over the course of this year. Today, we're going to be reading Genesis 45:19 through 27. Short little passage. And I'll be reading from the Robert Alter translation, and then we will discuss. And you charge them, this now do, take you from the land of Egypt, wagons, take you from the land of Egypt, wagons for your little ones and for your wives, and convey your father and come, and regret not your belongings, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. And so the sons of Israel did, and Joseph gave them wagons, as Pharaoh had ordered, and he gave them supplies for the journey. To all of them, each one, he gave changes of garments, and to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of garments. And to his father he sent as follows: 10 donkeys conveying the best of Egypt, and 10 she-asses conveying grain and bread and food for his father for the journey. And he sent off his brothers, and they went, and he said to them, do not be perturbed on the journey. And they went up from Egypt, and they came to the land of Canaan to Jacob their father. And they told him, saying, Joseph is still alive, and that he was ruler in all the land of Egypt. And his heart stopped, for he did not believe them. And they spoke to him all the words of Joseph that he had spoken to them. And he saw the wagons that Joseph had sent to convey him, and the spirit of Jacob their father revived. And that's where it ends. Kind of interesting. I would have thought it kept going, but it doesn't. It ends there. So we're going to keep going tomorrow with the rest of it. But we have this section which gets into what Joseph is doing to prepare them for the big journey. Lots of details about the items and things like that.
It's interesting. He still favors Benjamin.
Yes.
And in effect, he's telling him, you're going to have to live with the fact that
I prefer him.
Certain people have, may have higher status than others. That's just something you live with.
Yeah. I mean, there's something, I know that I certainly do not recommend or think it's appropriate for parents to show favoritism to children or things like that. But from a spiritual perspective, we all know that certain people do get certain blessings that others don't, and it's not always for us to understand. And sometimes we just have to deal with it. For whatever reason, certain people do manage to get more success in life or certain achievements or things like that. There's nothing in the Bible that says that equality of outcome is correct. That is not a biblical concept. So I know that's not very popular to say right now, but judging equality of outcome as and then reverse engineering and saying, well, if we were biblical, that's where we would get to. That's actually not what the Bible implies.
I would like to comment that Jacob had his name changed to Israel, and so there are times when he's referred to one way or the other. But in verse 20,
which is interesting because that doesn't happen to other people so much, right? Because Abraham doesn't go by Abram ever again,
right?
Does he?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And in 21, they're called the sons of Israel, as if to focus on the fact we're dealing now with the roots of the nation. And here they are called the sons of Israel, interestingly, in verse 21.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is we're not going to get to it here because we cut it off. But if you look at verse 27, it says the spirit of Jacob their father revived. But 28, it says, and Israel said. So it doesn't, like right there, there's a literary reason why in the verse it says Jacob revived, and then it says, and Israel said. It's almost like a transition. So it is very interesting.
Yeah, Israel focuses on the fact that he's the patriarch of a nation. Jacob is more individual in a way.
Yeah. So here you have a couple of some interesting symbolism. He gives them all changes of clothes. That's just a reoccurring motif in this. You have the cloak that causes him to get into trouble in the first place, and then he gets a cloak with Potiphar, and then there's a change of clothes, I believe, before he goes to Pharaoh when he shaves his head, and now there's a change of... So, this pattern of clothing being a motif is throughout the text. And obviously, that's a motif throughout the Bible. You have being clothed with things, or the armor of God, or things like that. Clothing is often used in such ways.
Symbolic of character in certain places.
Right. And if you think about it, it makes sense because it's the external way of identity, right? What you wear says a lot, can say a lot about you personality wise, which is why people put a lot of effort into it, maybe too much sometimes, but people put a lot of effort into clothing because it does represent you to a certain extent. It is an identifier. Or lack thereof, right? Some communities that have a costume, that's saying something about their sense of identity, as a community, and whether or not identity is that important. It's an interesting choice. What do you have for 24? Because he says, "Do not be perturbed on the journey," and I just think that's an interesting word.
See that you not become troubled. This is similar.
Yeah. He says here there's some dispute about what it says. It's occasionally used in contexts that are associated with anger, but the primary meaning of the verb is to quake or to shake either physically or emotionally. So what he says, in all likelihood, Joseph is reassuring his brothers they will not need to fear any lurking residue of vengefulness on his part, or that it would be a trap, which does kind of make sense because think of what happened last time. So he's like, I'm sending you on your way. Don't worry. There's no tricks this time.
Right. You've passed the test. You know what's interesting?
You have to think, though, they might have still been worried because look what happened last time. And now that they know who he is, it's almost worse, right? Because before they thought this random pharaoh was just being used by God to enact some sort of revenge, but now they know there's actually a personal reason why he might. So that's pretty funny. So there is a fair amount of trust they have to do in order to even execute this.
So Jacob didn't believe him initially. Although maybe it's the second part that he didn't believe. He's governor. Not only is he alive, but he's governor of the land of Egypt. That's a bit much to take in.
No, I think it's probably both. I mean, the apostles didn't believe when Jesus was resurrected, so I mean, I feel like it's
but you told me, you said earlier, maybe he held out hope that he was still alive.
But that doesn't mean you actually believe it when it's true.
All right, okay.
Because I don't think the apostles maybe didn't necessarily believe that there was more to the picture that they didn't know, but yet their first instinct was to be very doubtful about it. Right. Even though I'm sure they would have thought that, well, this doesn't make a whole lick of sense. This can't be the end of the story. But then on the other hand, as soon as they were presented the end of the story, their initial thought was to not believe it.
Well, it's when he saw the cloak, the coat with the blood and all, that's when he made his decision of what had happened. And now again, he sees the evidence, all these things that Joseph has sent. So once again, he sees the evidence.
Yeah. And, same thing with like Thomas. And I don't think there's something to be said about that, and that God will work with people. And, as much as we do need to step out on faith, the idea that there can't be ancillary evidence is not exactly fair. That's a human thing, and that's not necessarily wrong. To some degree, the constant checking shows a certain amount of diligence, because you don't want to just be overly gullible either. So, there's a balance.
Test all things.
Right, test all things. Right, yeah, exactly. It is interesting that he specifically gives them wagons and everything too, right? Like he sets them up in all different kinds of ways. He gives them clothing, he gives them money, he gives them animals, he gives them wagons. He really does, set them up grain and bread. It's quite a reversal of fortunes for them, because essentially not only are they getting moved to Egypt, they're getting moved to Egypt in style, right?
Perhaps doing more for Benjamin is again a way proving to his father who he is. Benjamin is my full brother.
Maybe
not only my half brother, but my full brother. So doing more for Benjamin is a way of letting his father know, yes, I am Joseph.
Yeah, the 5 changes of garments is the interesting part, because 300 pieces of silver, it kind of makes sense in a sense, because it's like, well, who do you want to trust the money to? He's the one he's the one that seems the most trustworthy of all of them. So if you have to entrust one of them, I guess he could have given them all 300 pieces equally, but it's like, give it to, he seems like the good one, the good steward of the money. I don't know. That kind of just seems smart, you know.
See, not Joseph was the birthright tribe, but later on Benjamin is the tribe from which the first king is chosen,
Yeah.
and later on uh, Mordecai is a Benjamite, and
Hmm.
Paul is a Benjamite. So
Yeah,
the tribe does
it's
have a
true.
prominent role in the Bible.
Yeah, interesting. And Benjamin's a character that you don't get too much about. He's like they don't describe much, and as far as I know, you don't really ever get any negative behavior from him. He's just kind of a, you
He,
know, he kind of goes along, and he's not that he was a sinless person, but we just don't know much about him, and so he essentially kind of plays that role in terms of being a type, you know, in the story, because
right.
we don't really get much information
His
about
descendants have real serious issues, but he's okay.
him. Well, maybe he did, and we just don't know. I'm just
Yeah,
saying, for the purposes of the narrative, he
right.
almost is like a perfect person,
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
just for the purposes of the narrative. All right. And anyway, Paul wasn't so bad, so let's not brag on Benjamin too, and Mordecai. So
Well, Paul had his issues too before he was converted.
that's true,
Yeah.
but it was channeled.
Okay.
So it does seem like there's a certain amount of like, if you want to compare Mordecai and Paul, there's a certain amount of toughness that can be channeled in multiple directions. But you know, in both of those situations ended up being channeled for good. So all right. So anything else about this, or we want to start moving on to Egypt?
Let's move on.
Move on to Egypt. Yeah. It almost feels like, I mean, sounds really simple, but it almost reminds me of like the Beverly Hillbillies. It's like, it's, hey, Egypt is the place we gotta be, like, and they just like, they're just picturing them like with these wagons, you know, they just load up all this stuff, and then they just like head out there. And to some degree, though, I actually don't even know if it's all that different in that. I mean, imagine the cultural shock, right? You're completely leaving your area, you're having to go to this random place, and the culture's quite different. It must have been quite an experience.
It may be like the Dust Bowl. I didn't.
Yeah,
I haven't read Grapes of Wrath. I'm somewhat familiar with the idea.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. The people that had to flee the
so
Midwest or whatever.
yeah,
Yeah,
had to leave the area
yeah,
where there was no fertility there right
yeah.
then.
It happens a lot. The Bible's very nomadic, like a
And,
lot of the stories. But I think that does say something about us in terms of our
right.
we should be flexible. I think honestly sometimes, in terms of literally physically where we are for spiritual growth, but then also, even if you want to abstract that, just mentally, you have to be prepared for that too. You need to be willing to stretch yourself and put yourself in uncomfortable situations in order to get spiritual growth. If you make yourself too comfortable, you're probably stagnating. So
Yeah.
anyway,
I
not to get too philosophical on
yeah.
you.
Well, it's interesting. Sometimes reluctance to move is a problem.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah,
I'm trying to think of an example where the opposite is true in the Bible, where they shouldn't move and they do, and it's bad. I can think of a lot of examples where they need to move and they either don't want to,
well, in the
or they're
case
kind of forced to. But
Jeremiah, after the fall of Jerusalem, the people wanted to flee to Egypt, and God said, "Don't flee to Egypt."
okay, so there you go. So there is the
Yeah,
example. There's
yeah,
usually always a counter example
yeah,
because the Bible's very nuanced. So
yeah.
thank you for that. All right. So anyway, if you enjoyed this podcast, please like, subscribe, hit the bell, call up your friends, and we will read the law together. See you tomorrow.